So let me once again thank everyone who's been out here today. Our sponsors have been phenomenal. Hopefully you've got a chance to meet some of them right here. And we're going to go ahead and start this conversation up. So let me first open up by having each of our folks, starting down there with Greta, just quickly introduce themselves and what you're doing. And then I'll ask a couple questions, but I'm going to unmoderate this very quickly and get everybody involved. Greta.
Thank you so much, Clayton. This has been a great day. Thank you all for being here. I'm the co-director of the Digital Equity Lab, which is a research center at the New School. And we advance digital equity through applied research, policy strategy, and convening. So that's what I do. Did you want more than that, or is that?
I always want more than that, Greta, but we'll keep it moving quickly because
right, let's go.
I'm going to be coming back to you.
Hi, everybody. John Paul Farmer. I lead the Microsoft Cities team based here in New York City. And what we do is we try to solve problems. We work on civic tech and urban tech, trying to understand what the challenges are here in New York City, and understand what's the role for data, technology, and innovation in solving them. That's not to say that data, technology, and innovation solve things on their own, but they can help us. And so that's what we try to do. We work with every sector of society, local government, nonprofits, startups, universities, civic hackers, and this has been 4 or 5 years working with Silicon Harlem now. And it's a partnership that's going strong. Prior to this, I was in DC for about 4 years, working in the Obama White House, where I was the senior advisor for innovation, and worked on getting some of our government agencies to operate at startup speed. Now, it doesn't mean they stop being government agencies and doing the things they do for the communities, but trying to learn best practices from places that you wouldn't naturally look. That's something I believe in pretty strongly, cross-pollination of ideas.
When John moved here, John Paul Farmer, I met him in his first few days working, and he didn't have a mustache. Now you got the most incredible mustache I've ever seen. And I just want to say I've had a personal relationship with every single person on this particular panel. Greta goes back some ways with us, and she was at our, I think, first or second conference speaking. But she ended up working for New America. And New America was tasked to create resilient networks, which she was one of the authors of. And we, Silicon Harlem, knew that East Harlem was a vulnerable space in terms of the next Hurricane Sandy. And as a result of our relationship and just having that sort of focus, Silicon Harlem is now building a resilient network in East Harlem. So I want to thank you for that.
So before I pass it on to David, I also just want to say something about this place. So National Black Theater is a place that I think is incredibly special, and I'm so happy that we're all here today. Back in 2008, I got to spend the 4th of July with the founder of National Black Theater, Barbara Ann Tier, Dr. Barbara Ann Tier, and it's because I was good friends with her son, Michael, and her daughter, Sade. Less than 3 weeks later, she passed away unexpectedly, and her children have carried on the legacy with this community keeping the arts and culture alive, keeping the National Black Theater alive. And I think it's just fantastic to see Silicon Harlem bring us here today to expand, in some ways, the mission and the conversations that happen in this space. So thanks, Clayton and Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Anthony Thomas. I'm with the city's Economic Development Corp, which is a nonprofit that drives economic development, manages assets, and uses a robust toolkit to grow jobs in New York. I have a pretty vague title. I lead partnerships for EDC, but what that means is I manage our strategic relationships, I oversee all of our international collaborations, which is becoming more important in the political environment we exist, and then oversee our strategic business attraction. And so I'm a former Harlem resident. I lived here during the most formative part of my adulthood, and so I have a special relationship with this neighborhood.
So I'm Anne, and I'm from SAP, and I actually want to say that I have a global role in SAP, and where I drive innovation with purpose, a big community across 180 countries around the world, but I'm here in New York or at Hudson Yards Inn. And Actually, Claire and I just came out with this book called Startup Guides. And right now we are getting filmed because this startup guide is actually a guide that has been done in 23 cities around the world, 40 by end of next year. And it goes from Joburg to, we're heading over to LA next week, to Oslo or any places in the world. And the crew that is here today, and they interviewed Clay earlier today, they're actually creating a film about New York, about the new buzz of New York as the innovation cities of the world. And we had a conversation about what are you putting in a film like this? You put in the best. And that's why not everything is getting in. It is the new New York. It is the new innovation of New York, which got into this book and which is getting into the film. So I'm super honored that we are here right now at this amazing event and that Clay is both in the book but also in the film that we're going to do.
Yeah. And yes. And for any startup in New York City or almost anywhere in the world, if you go through that book, you're going to find so many shortcuts to be successful. There are people with the startups that have really figured out a way to success. That's the book. It's now available. And I'm very proud of it, and Anne has been at the forefront of helping the author and everyone else collected that so much of the data. I'm not going to even say data around Dr. Norton no more. So thank you, Anne, for that. And we already met Dr. Norton, so let me get right into my first question. So, Dr. Norton, I'm actually going to ask you first. How would you define community?
People who have a shared history, they have stories that they develop together. They have not necessarily all good experiences. I think trauma can unite people too, if they can actually find a way to deal with it. It's some sort of commitment to each other, not always a happy commitment to each other, but a commitment to each other, and a recognition in each other as people who are sharing the same place and whose destinies are wrapped up in each other.
So when you think about that, Anne, specifically with the lab you've built and the ones you've built around the world, the innovation labs, what are you seeing come out of that effort as it is, as Dr. Norton said, a way for communities to come together, whether that's for something good or sometimes something bad?
So I'm not just overexcited to be here. I'm really excited. I'm really excited about that question because who the heck am I? I'm from Denmark and sitting here in Harlem. And isn't this global mission that communities is becoming movement? But there's something very special around New York and very special around Harlem is that this is here movement, activism. We can change the world. And why is that? That's because we have UN, we have United Nations here in New York. And if you guys don't know it, and I know you know it, we are the place in the world where the world leaders, they come. The world CEOs comes and have huge conversation around how we can reach the 17 global goals by 2030. And I didn't know that when I came here. I thought, and I love fashion, I came from Silicon Valley, and SAP is a huge technology software company. And I came to New York, and I didn't see New York as an innovation hub of the world. But it is actually the biggest innovation hub of the world, and it has happened in less than 3 years because of United Nations, and because and I've just been on a 3 weeks travel in Europe, and I always think about, because no matter where I go today, I'm always about movement, activism, we're going to change, we could do something. And I was not like that before I came to New York, but this is what New York do to you. It make you get out there and say, I'm going to change the world. So when we open up this space at Hudson Yard, which is just ridiculous, and I know that it's a 30,000 square feet with a remarkable view of Hudson River, and if you haven't been there, please come and join. And it's the places for you. It's built for New York, and it's built for the world to see how inclusive New York is. So it's built in a way that when you walk into that space, because there's no walls, you clearly feel that you can conquer the world. And this is what you feel when you are in New York, because New York is a world city. And that is what have empowered me to say, can we reach the 17 global goals? Of course we can. We can do it together. It's all about we and partnerships. And teaming up with Civic and Harlem make me so proud, because I'm from a country, Denmark, where education is for free. Internet is, of course, you have internet. You have a healthcare system that is for free. Everything is for free. I mean, it's just, very sweet and nice and cool. And you take it for given. But when you realize, when you come outside Denmark, you realize that's not just a human right to anybody. But it should be, because if it is in one country, it should be in any country, any city in the world. So I'm here in New York to fight, and I do it next to United Nations.
Yeah. So Mark, you've been at the wheel of funding a lot of communities, and the NYCEDC, along with Curtis, who's done so much here in Harlem through his agency. How do you look at all this, the community, and how do communities like Harlem continue to work with you to get the kind of resources to continue to advance this community?
Yeah, I'll tell a quick story. I left New York for about 4 years, and when EDC was creating this position that I now have, I was comfortable in Los Angeles. I remember thinking, if we were to solve how we do inclusive economic growth anywhere in the world, it would probably be in New York. And so even though my cycle of time outside of the city was good, I actually really want to be back at EDC, where I've seen kind of them evolve from a real estate focused entity to one that is now moving to really make sure that the tools and the investments we make and the way that we do things really include the best seats at the table for everybody. And to me, when I think of community, I believe I'm tasked with building that. And it is a beautiful picture when you spend a month, like I spent kicking off Startup Guide New York, and then ending it launching a virtual reality lab in Brooklyn, and then seeing all the types of things that I see that we're doing now. And my goal is to push more of that, make sure more people know that we're open for business and that we want to collaborate and that you can be a part of all the things that we do and help us shape the next generation of the city.
Nice. Very good. So John Paul, you work for that small company called Microsoft. But you've really, having worked in the Obama administration and now working in such a specific area for Microsoft on the civic initiatives, how are you connecting with communities?
So we're connecting with communities in a lot of ways. I really view my job as being a feedback loop between communities. We're actually operating in 10 cities across the country. Obviously, I'm here in New York. It's to understand these communities more deeply than a company typically does. Typically, the company is off in a building or on a corporate campus somewhere. We're here in the community. So I have a desk. I'm rarely at it. I'm usually out doing something somewhere in New York City in one of the boroughs. And that's how I come to understand how our existing products and services are really impacting people's lives and where they're not, where are the gaps, where are the holes. And then I bring that information back into the company. And so I can help the community understand what we have to offer in terms of helping create solutions. And I can help the company understand what's really needed so we can create better stuff.
And thank you for that, John. John does, I'm telling you, he's right. I can never find this guy. He's running around everywhere, but he's helping wherever he is. Greta, you've spent most of your career on trying to help communities. And so if you could comment a little bit about that, but also comment, I think you were here for Dr. Norton's presentation, and talk about how data has sort of worked out in your world and how your vision has been shaped.
Wow, that's a lot of ground to cover. But I think, Dr. Norton, it struck me, was talking about community as sort of a unit of data gathering. And I think that's, sort of the dystopian view that's emerging from a lot of these sort of next-gen projects where people have privacy concerns, what happens when public data then becomes a product, it's privatized and sold back as an urban planning tool, for example. And so that makes us really wonder, what is community? Is it a unit of data gathering? Is it people coming together? And as you mentioned, I have worked for a long time in a field that a bunch of us self-defined as community technology. And what we were thinking about was the way that technology products are usually marketed to individuals, and it's usually on the individual to protect their own privacy. The way that things are measured and understood is as an individual interacting with technology. And so a bunch of us were asking, what happens when you really think about technology as a community experience or something? How does it shape communities? And as part of that, I looked at the work of sociologists like Eric Kleinenberg, the work of Rebecca Solnit, people who really thought about resiliency and thought about how social fabric, how community defined as a whole, becomes a way that people come together to respond to emergencies. If the emergencies that we're seeing right now are related to technology, how can communities respond? So I just think, looking at the last 2 years, looking at everything that's happened, looking at the way that many of us have felt a sense of, well, I'll speak for myself. I've felt despair and loss and fear, and a lot of it's wrapped up in technology, a lot of it's separate from technology, but the bright side of that has been kind of a lesson in civics, like a lesson in community, which has been, okay, we gotta organize, we gotta go canvass, we gotta go hit the streets, we gotta figure out who takes care of the children while we hit the streets. And even though I've worked in community technology for a long time, I have to say I've learned a lot about community that I never realized before, and I think a lot of elders, a lot of folks in this room could teach us all a lot about all of that. Some of us who come from technology, we're relearning or learning for the first time about that. So what I'm excited about in rethinking community is rethinking how to relearn all those old lessons and say, okay, there's all these shiny objects with technology. There's all this next generation stuff. That's not going to change the fact that the seas are rising. It's not going to change the fact that we're having a census in 2020, which is going to be almost impossible, and all indicators point to that census producing pretty much unreliable data. It's not going to change the fact that the procurement systems in the city don't support necessarily the education of a workforce that's ready for next-gen technology. All of those things that we're going to have to solve in community, and it's going to be that hard work of hitting the pavement, of getting together, of having potlucks, that really real stuff. So that's how I would define it these days.
Amazing, amazing. We're gonna
Clayton,
open
could I
up
actually-
the.
could I actually follow up
Please do.
and-
You guys get your questions together. We're getting ready to do that.
So since I've got a microphone, y'all have to listen to me.
I got one too, brother.
Well, we'll see. So I want to say something about Professor Norton's presentation, which I thought was really fascinating. Thank you for that. And that's that while I agree data don't drive, data informs. And I think in some ways the presentation, some people might hear that and think data is a villain. Data is the bad guy in the story. But in reality, it's how the data gets used. And so the problem is the people making the decisions about how the data gets used, it hasn't been happening locally in communities like this, in conversations like this, and it hasn't been happening at, say, a federal government level either. It's various companies are making the decisions, and they're choosing what to do with our data. But on the flip side, as scary as it is, and the prior panel here was about data security and the like, and thinking about how to make sure that you're not leaving yourself vulnerable, and that's important. The flip side is there's also the risk of data poverty, where entire communities aren't represented in the data that's being fed into these new artificial intelligence systems and are being forgotten, and the tools that are being built suddenly only augment the abilities of one community and not another. And so I think it's a lot more complex than just saying, well, I don't really like data. It's really, how's the data being used, which data exists, which data doesn't exist, and who's making the decisions about how the data gets used.
I was about to insist that the audience have their turn, but now I have to say something, right? Because I think I compared data to a compass on a ship. And it's actually it's not just a comparison, it's a fact. That's the data that guides the ship. Any ship's captain who comes along and says, oh, data don't drive, throw the compass overboard even though we're in the middle of the ocean and there's no landmarks in view, that's a bad call. And in saying that, I'm recognizing that data are indispensable. The problem is that they literally do not drive anything at all any more than a compass reading drives something. We need people who need to determine what the agendas are, what we want, and then the data guide those. I completely agree that they're data deserts. I would like to give the audience a turn, though, and I'm now in the way of that.
You saw John pick up his mic. Let's go! I'm ready to go! And Dr. Norton said, I'm still trying to get back to Virginia, man. Leave me alone. Yeah, we will do that. Bruce, come on up here so we can handle some of these people around here. Because I know everybody got something to say right now. So, after party, okay. Let's go ahead and get this started. We have a hand right here. You're going to have to speak up loud because I don't, oh, here's the mic. Here we go.
All right. So, Clayton, I'm Blake White, as you know. So first of all, I'm listening to you guys debate, and I just want to comment first to Dr. Norton. Thank you very much, because as one who's worked in Silicon Valley for 40 years, I can tell you that there are people building product who don't get the human element and don't even know they need to ask. So thank you very much. I think what you pointed out to us, however, is that in the cases you had, data was being selectively chosen for an economic and perhaps political agenda. John, from what I hear you saying, is really more profound in an area of AI. And that is, AI is trained based on the data it's given. And in Silicon Valley, the data it's being given is not just a data desert. The people doing it don't even know that they've left the group out. And so they're building products that do not meet the needs of a broad global population because they are insensitive to the fact that they need to ask the question. Oh, excuse me. So, with that said, my question is, what might we be doing to eliminate the bias that's in the data that's being fed in the system? That's the question.
So I'm going to...
Now the next question will not have that long, nice lead up. And I love Blake. He's just way too smart. The rest of us, and you're all smart, but let's keep the questions very short and tight. We only have a little bit of time here, right? Let's go, Greta. Go ahead.
Okay,
Give
I'm going to let
him a
everybody
good, quick answer.
Everybody else talk about AI. I just want to talk about the census for 1 second, because when you talk about not having data and being starved of data, what we're seeing happening with the 2020 census is that it's going to be online. And what that means is that anybody who's on the wrong side of the digital divide is going to have a really hard time filling out the census. And we know who's on the wrong side of the digital divide, right? It's the same people that are always undercounted. So when you're undercounted, you're not represented in government, you don't receive services, you're not allocated funding for the programs that you need. And so, you know, what we see with the 2020 census is basically the systematic undermining of public data so that researchers don't have it, municipalities don't have it, and it's not used in these critical decisions about how we're represented and the programs that support our communities.
So really quickly, I'll just add to that. I think there's a big question. One of the big issues is opacity versus transparency, and so we need more eyes on the data and on the algorithms that have been written, and so we can understand. This isn't a black box, right? We can understand how it works. We can understand how it's affecting our lives. And there are some tricky questions here, especially when you come into IP, intellectual property rights. So if a company says, I wrote this code, I don't want to make it public, that's actually like Coca-Cola doesn't tell you what their recipe is, why should I have to tell you? We've got to have some really hard conversations as a society about in which cases does the code, do the algorithms need to be interrogated by a third party, and when is that not necessary? And same thing with data. Which data sources are you using to train your models? And when do we need to know that and when do we not? And when does society come in? And when do we leave it up to the typical behaviors of the private sector?
Ann?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to, so, I mean, a lot of what we talk about is with data for AI, but people have been using data for human decisions that have disproportionately affected people of color for a long time, right? And so during my time in Los Angeles, one of the biggest policy reforms that happened was I was asked to help Los Angeles understand why all of its poor neighborhoods were not clean. And they built a sanitation and a public works department that basically left the poor communities and people that looked like us in the shadows when services were being delivered. And so what I had to do was then propose a whole new way of metricizing how clean each of the streets were, which has resulted in now 80% of the city being cleaner than when it was first measured. And since then, Bloomberg Philanthropies has launched a data-driven fund that cites the work I led as one of the models for the type of stuff they want to fund. But I say that to say, like, data is only what you're metricizing and what you're measuring, right? And I think people who've seen the tail end of that, who've been affected, have to be able to contribute to how you change things.
So I'm going to change the conversation and speak about opportunity, because we often are really good at looking at all the stuff we can't do and restrictions and so on. I think we need kind of to reflect on, we are in New York City, and that was the reason why we created a startup guide. We got New York on the map of the world, that this is right now the biggest innovation city in the world because we have UN Innovation with Purpose. We are the city in the world that have most C-level coming in. We are the city in the world who have most female entrepreneurs than any other places in the world. We are the city in the world who was the second to get most VC funding in last year. So we have a lot to celebrate. Secondly, if you look at innovation, 1.0 is what started in Silicon Valley, where everybody went to Silicon Valley, me including me, because that's where innovation, and that's where you found innovation. Innovation 2.0 is where innovation became pocket all over the world. Innovation 3.0 is what New York have created and provided to the world. Innovation with purpose. And what is happening now is that we go into Innovation 4.0, where we can do, today you have been talking about immersive technology, you've been talking about the fact that everybody have access to internet. What does that mean? We've been talking about education, systems are changing. So what does that mean? It gives us absolutely amazing opportunities. So what we need to make sure we do for the youth, and it doesn't matter if you are youth in Harlem, or you are any place in Manhattan, or any place, whatever in New York City, the fact that we are a world city and we are gone on the world map, and I really mean the world map, at Hudson Yard where I am, only 10% of the people coming there, of companies, are coming from the United States. They come from the world. That was what I said to Clay. I said, I will make Harlem become world known, because this is what we can do. SAP is a German company. We have the world coming to Hudson Yard. So what I want to see for the next generation, while my team is called SAP Next-Gen, and this event is called Next Generation, is that we need to make sure that we begin to focus on all the opportunities we have when we build technology solutions. We know that during the next 5 years, that all business-to-business and business-consumer apps will have a voice component to it. I'm just asking who is working on that right now, right? We need to make sure we enable youth to get working on this, and we need to make sure UN expect that the next generation is the SDG generation. So we need to make sure that the solution which is built is linked to purpose. So and sorry for being very, but we can always talk about issues, but we literally are so spoiled here. We are in this city in the world who is known as the city innovation purpose. And you can get anybody to come to New York City. So let us turn it around and use that huge advances that only we have because we are in New York City.
So you can use data against data. I think we have to recognize that what goes on in a society is a competition between competing agendas, and when one social group is coming out short, they need to get the data they need. For example, redlining was perpetrated by data. Redlining was data-driven. Redlining still is data-driven. But check it out. What's the most effective responses to redlining been? It has been getting the data that exposes it for what it is, right? I have friends who think that police brutality is something new. It's like, no, what we've got now is the data that was just harder to get before, right? So, you know, and what at least has helped us to recognize the extent of it is that the people who are collecting the data now include some people who aren't, you know, on the official side of that divide. So what you've got to do is make sure every person, and this is why I love Clayton Banks and why I love Bruce Lincoln, is because they want to make sure that every person can get that kind of data to empower themselves instead of having to listen to some official answer that they're not allowed or not equipped to reply to.
I'm going to push this along because not only do we got to sort of get out of this place at some point, but we have a performance that's going to be happening over here, and you're going to love it. So I want to take another question, and we're going to start wrapping it up. But go ahead, wherever you go, Hope, go ahead and give the mic to somebody. We see you, Bob. We'll see what else is going on.
Excuse me. The woman next to Mr. Norton, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
That's Ann.
Ann, I'm sorry, Ann. You just said something that struck a chord, so I want to make sure I heard it correctly, that you're making the world know about Harlem for the first time, it sounds like. And I'm sorry, I have to pause to correct that because Harlem is known all over the world for a number of attributes. And so one of the interesting things about data is when you go to other parts of the world and you start sharing narratives that are not totally true, it clouds the data, okay? And then when people come into these environments, they think of it one way, like it's now existing, like we're now on the map, or there's a new Harlem Renaissance. That's kind of backwards. The Renaissance is going to be 100 years in 2020. And in that 100 years, there have been a number of things that have happened and have amplified the voice of this community. So when sharing this content, I just want to be clear, and please correct me if I heard you wrong, that we're not just sharing with the world right now.
So you actually heard me wrong, because I agree, everybody know around Silicon Harlem. What I have done in the startup guidebook here is that when we went in with the startup guides, first of all, New York, nobody saw New York as a big startup city for 2 years ago. You had Silicon Valley, you saw it Boston, and you saw it Chicago. And when we went into New York, we kind of said, but there's a lot of there's a big startup scene in New York, and that goes from Brooklyn to Harlem to all over New York. So when I see Harlem, I also see New York from a startup scene perspective, not seeing Harlem. I'm speaking about the startup guides. I'm speaking about when you as a corporation anywhere in the world want to meet startups. In the beginning, companies went to Silicon Valley. They often if you came over from Germany, you would probably go to Chicago and Boston, but you wouldn't go to New York City. And so what we did was we said we need to make sure that we get the startup environment in New York City known for the world. So that's what I'm talking about. So when I met Clay Christensen and I got involved in what he's doing here in Harlem, and we were mapping out the startup guide, I said we need to make sure that all the entrepreneurship activities that you're doing in Harlem need to go into the book. So I didn't speak about Harlem in general, I spoke about the startup activities in Harlem. And this is what I do worldwide, just like I was recently in Cape Town. I'm heading over to LA now because LA is becoming a big place for the startup scene. I'm going into Joburg with the Mandela 100th anniversary together with the Global Citizen Festival. And that is because people tend to say, when I look for innovation, I go to certain places. But my philosophy is that you can find entrepreneurs and innovation in any places in the world, including Harlem. And that was what I spoke about. I didn't speak about Harlem because I know world know Harlem. I spoke about Harlem to get Harlem into the startup guide, and that's also why I got the film crew out here today to do filming and interview with Clay Christensen, so people know the incredible startup scene that you have here in Harlem.
All right.
Does that make
So-
sense?
I just have one
Let me,
quick question.
hold on a second. All right, so I'll have Bruce answer this, but I know in Harlem we don't play none of that kind of stuff, so I get the point. But what Anna is actually saying, and she said it clearly, is that one of the things that we're trying to do for New York City, not just Harlem, but for New York City in general, and you can talk to the mayor about this and others, is one, we've put an edict out there that every home should have a connection by 2025. That came right out of de Blasio's mission. Some of his team is here and can vouch for that. Every home in the home will have an internet connection by 2025. All of us have to do that. And the reason is he wants to see, and I think the rest of us would like to see, New York City being the go-to place when it comes to technology and innovation, when it comes to cybersecurity. You know, you guys probably read in the Times how much money is being poured into that, with Mark and everybody else. You're going to find that there's money coming into New York City for the universities to build out new programs. We have to be prepared as New York City to be the go-to place for all things that are going to drive the economy, and doggone it, we're not going to let Harlem be left behind. And that's why Silicon Harlem is here. I mean, that's not the only reason, but for one main reason is we want to do what every Harlemite wants to do, which is to make sure that Harlem stays Harlem, but it's thriving economically, it's attracting resources, it's building a pathway to college and not to jail. It's doing what we're supposed to do for all the generations that are going to be coming behind me, and it doesn't matter what it's going to take, but we just happen to believe that creating a tech and innovation ecosystem in Upper Manhattan should be worldwide. And everyone in the world should come to Harlem to make it. Back when I was in college, everyone told me, Clayton, because of the stuff I studied, oh, you got to go to Silicon Valley. You got to go to Silicon Valley if you want to really get down, you know? Well, now people in Austin, Texas, people in Denver, Colorado, people in Seattle can say, I'm coming out of school, maybe I ought to go to Silicon Harlem. Maybe I should go to Harlem. Look at what they got going on over there. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm only going to take one more question because I got other things to do, like look at my shoes and stuff like that. And so who's going to be a lucky person to give us the last question? Now,
I
let me
got the
tell you.
mic.
Oh, like that.
I got the mic.
Okay,
I'm
he
taking
grabbed the
it.
mic. See, John, you're not the only one to grab the mic. So let me say, Dr. Norton is not going to run, but he probably can't stay that long. So if you have questions for him specifically, grab him. Okay, listen, we're in Harlem. We're respectful, okay, Dr. Norton?
So my question is for everybody in the room. We've been told about all the tools that we have now to solve all of our problems. But we also have an administration in place that has another agenda to make our problems worse. So we don't have a lot of time. So the question is, what are we going to build now to create sustainability and create wealth for ourselves? What are we going to build for ourselves personally, for our businesses, and for our family?
Okay,
That's
we're
my
going to
question.
end on that question, starting with Greta, coming all the way through to Bruce. Okay, well, whoever can start, you know.
I mean, can I start?
Mark.
Actually, so I love my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and I'm a big person about Black history specifically. I believe in sustainability to some extent, but I've never been a person that thought I need to be calm. The whole point of being woke, you know, which you hear a lot of us young people say, is about making sure my children and their children keep moving the life forward. And so what we can do now is be empowered, be creative, be smart, have the right tools, make sure our children have the right tools to really understand where the world is heading. I just came back from Australia visiting, and it's amazing watching their indigenous people who identify as black look to us as like the model for how to really empower themselves, right? And so as mad as I was about what's happening nationally, I felt kind of good there saying like, no, we have made that difference. And so we have to keep pushing that. And I think technology gives us easier tools to do it and be more aggressive with it.
Great. Who's next? Great.
So I think there are two things that are necessary. One is skills, the other is resources. In terms of skills, this is why you have to think about what's in demand from the changing economy. And this is what Silicon Harlem's done a great job of training youth up in Harlem with the right kinds of technical digital skills that are going to be relevant and in demand. That's why at Microsoft we created Tech Jobs Academy, where we ran this for 50 New Yorkers to see if it would work. These are folks, most of them didn't have college degrees, and we took them in a matter of 4 months from $9,000 a year income to $50,000 a year. And so taking people from poverty to the middle class through the right kinds of skills. And the other part is resources. And there's no resource more important than connectivity and closing the digital divide.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm going to say again, I think we need to build civic participation. That's what we need to build right now. We already have it. We know how to do it. We got to remember how to do it. We got to really learn about what our libraries are doing already. We got to make them stronger. We have to learn how to get each other out to help each other. I mean, it's really about building the social infrastructure, and I don't mean that in the way that Mark Zuckerberg says it. I mean it in the way of real social infrastructure, because leaving everything else aside, leaving all the next generation technology aside, that's what's going to save us in the end. And, you know, technology can help. Specific technologies can help. But in the end, it's a social question.
I see here during the last 2 years that the public-private partnership is becoming stronger and stronger. And especially if you look around UN, the 17 global goals, I think corporations have figuring out that they can't do everything alone. Governments have figured out they can't do everything alone. So you begin to see a much closer cooperation. You see academia working together with corporations and government. And so I think those partnerships is what will help us going forward. And I also see the next generation of youth coming out. I think STEM education is a human right for everybody, because you can see any kind of job, any kind of industry being enabled by technology is a must, because technology plays such a big role today. And with our immersive technologies, you can do anything you want. And that's why we work with science fiction as a mindset now, to activate all those opportunities, to understand what technology can do. So I think this is important, but it's also interesting when you ask about our definition of community. I don't think community, maybe way back in time, community have been very strong, but community and movement and activism is becoming extremely strong now, right? Nobody minds saying I'm an activist. It's kind of funny. I never thought I was going to say I'm an activist now. In the corporate world, people don't mind saying I'm an activist. I drive a movement, or if you're an actor, I'm an actor and an activist. So people really take responsibility, and I think that's where I see a change. And again, as I said earlier, it's not about what I want, it's about what we can do together, I think. So I think the partnership between public, private, is the essence for how we will see the future going forward.
It's a big question. All I can say is I think technology is going to be indispensable, but it won't deliver anything to us on its own. I think we're going to have to heal our values as people. I think actually in that sense there's some grounds for optimism, because I have some confidence that values like decency are common and across religious backgrounds, across ethnic backgrounds, and across political spectrums. People who recognize decency miss it and would like to see it, and recognizing that a self-sufficient simplicity with humility is a worthier life than self-important high consumption, prestige, glamour, and that you can make, in your last weeks on this earth, you'll have more consolation in what you've done to help other people than in what you've had to show off to them to make them envious of you. I mean, it's values that I think are going to be the fertilizer that makes something good grow out of this garden we call community. It's not going to be the technology, as useful as the technology is.